The sun baked the town of Redstone until even the shadows seemed tired. Dust swirled through Main Street like restless ghosts, and every step crunched against the parched ground. From the porch of the Silver Spur Saloon, a dozen men leaned on the railing, half to shield themselves from the heat and half to watch the most untamable sight the West had ever known: Clara Mae Hensley, the rancher's daughter who'd broken more hearts than drought had broken crops. Her figure, tall and graceful, moved across the yard with the poise of someone who knew her own worth, and yet the eyes that turned after her didn't see arrogance. They saw challenge. For 5 years, suitors had come from every direction of the frontier, each one convinced he could be the man to win her hand. 13 had tried. 13 had failed. It wasn't that Clara was cruel. She simply wanted something more, something beyond the gold watches, fancy words, and promises of a comfortable life. Her father, Jedediah Hensley, was one of the richest cattlemen between Arizona and Kansas, and most who rode up to the Hensley ranch came with hats full of charm and eyes on the inheritance. Clara saw through every one of them. She wanted a man who didn't come chasing fortune, a man who wouldn't try to tame her spirit or buy her love. But as years passed, that hope began to feel like a mirage on the desert horizon. The 13th suitor came in a polished carriage from Santa Fe, a lawyer named Everett Langdon, slick-haired and soft-handed, with the kind of smile that could talk a jury into believing the sky was green. He came bearing flowers from California, a silver locket from New York, and a speech that sounded like it had been practiced in front of a mirror. He spoke of cities and civilization, of moving Clara away from this dusty wilderness, and into a proper life. He thought he was offering her a dream. She saw it as a cage wrapped in ribbon. That night, when he took her hand and said, "Miss Clara Mae, I intend to make you the happiest lady in the territory," she looked at him long and steady before replying, "Then you ought to start with someone who believes happiness can be bought." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it was final. Everett turned pale as paper and left before sunrise. The next morning, folks whispered it down every street corner: 13. She's rejected 13. Clara didn't care for talk, but she heard it anyway. Even her father, who admired her backbone, began to worry she'd turned away every chance at love. "You can't wait forever, darlin'," Jedediah told her one evening while oiling his rifle on the porch. "Good men don't ride through Redstone every day." Clara just smiled faintly and said, "Then maybe I'll wait for one who isn't looking for me." And, as if summoned by fate, that man came not on a fine horse or a carriage, but on a broken-down bay mare with dust on his hat and silence in his eyes. His name was Eli Carter. Nobody knew much about him except that he worked odd jobs for cash and kept to himself. He didn't drink, didn't boast, didn't even glance Clara's way when they passed in town. He was a quiet cowboy, the kind who fixed fences at sunrise and left before the coffee cooled. The first time Clara really noticed him was when a thunderstorm rolled through the valley. Most folks ran for cover, but she saw Eli in the rain, helping an old widow pull her mules from the flooded creek. No words, no pay, just grit and heart. He didn't see her watching from under the stable roof, and that made it hit harder. He wasn't doing it for praise. He was just good. After that, she saw him everywhere. At the blacksmith's helping lift a wagon axle, at the churchyard repairing the fence, at the orphanage bringing supplies when no one asked him to. He never spoke more than a few words, but those words carried weight, like each one had been earned the hard way. Clara found herself wondering what story lay behind those quiet eyes, what kind of life made a man so steady. One afternoon, she rode into town to trade goods and found her horse spooked by a rattler near the trough. Before she could react, Eli appeared out of nowhere, calm as still water, and struck the snake with a shovel before it could coil again. Clara's heart was still racing when he said, "You all right, miss?" She nodded, breathless, and he tipped his hat, ready to walk away. But she stopped him. "You saved my horse. Let me buy you a drink." He hesitated. "Don't drink," he said softly. "Coffee then," she offered. That made him smile. the first real smile she'd seen from him. They sat at the saloon's back corner, and she found herself talking more than she'd planned. About the ranch, about the Suitors, about wanting a life that felt real. Eli listened. When she finished, he said, "Seems to me, Miss Hensley, you ain't lookin' for a man to take care of you. You're lookin' for someone who don't mind ridden beside you." That single sentence hit her deeper than any poetry she'd ever heard. Weeks passed. The town started whispering again, this time about Clara and the quiet cowboy. But there was no proposal, no courtship. Eli never asked her for her hand, never even hinted at it. He just helped when needed, worked without complaint, and looked at her with respect instead of desire. That, more than anything, made her heart ache in a way she'd never known. For the first time, she wanted to be chosen, not for her land, not for her looks, but for her soul. Then came the day trouble rode into Redstone. A band of outlaws led by Boone Keller decided to rob the stagecoach near the Hensley Ranch, knowing it carried payroll cash. Clara's father tried to stop them, but shots were fired, and chaos split the air. When the smoke cleared, Jedediah was wounded, and one outlaw broke into the ranch house looking for loot. Clara grabbed her father's rifle, trembling but fierce, and faced him down alone. Just when he raised his gun at her, a single bullet cracked from the doorway, Eli Carter's bullet. He'd come to return a borrowed saddle and walked right into the fight. The outlaw fell, and Clara ran into Eli's arms as the echo faded over the plains. That night, with her father resting inside and the lawmen taking Boone Keller away, Clara stood with Eli on the porch. "You saved us," she whispered. Eli shook his head. "Didn't save you, Miss Hensley. Just did what was right." She looked at him, tears mixing with the dust on her cheeks. "You never asked for my hand, Eli." "Why not?" He stared into the dying sunset and said quietly, "Because I figured a woman like you ought to choose for herself. And I ain't got much to offer, 'cept a good heart and calloused hands." Clara stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. "That's all I ever wanted." For a moment, the world was silent but for the wind across the prairie. Then she took his hand and smiled. The girl who'd rejected 13 suitors had finally chosen the one man who never asked. And as the stars rose over Redstone, folks swore the Hensley Ranch had never felt so alive. The morning after the gunfight dawned with the smell of smoke and sage drifting across the valley. The Hensley Ranch bore the scars of battle, broken fences, shattered windows, and blood stains drying on the dust, but the spirit within it stood taller than ever. Clara Mae Hensley, who'd once been called the most stubborn girl in Redstone, now walked with the quiet strength of someone who'd found her purpose. Her father was alive, her home was safe, and the man who'd saved them both slept in the barn, refusing a soft bed for fear of disrespect. That was Eli Carter, humble, proud, and selfless to a fault. In town, rumors had already turned him into a legend. The drifter who'd killed Boone Keller's man with one shot, who'd stood beside the Hensleys when half the town hid behind locked doors. But Eli didn't crave thanks or fame. By noon, he was back fixing the same fences he'd mended before, his hat low, his hands calloused. Clara watched from the porch, her heart full of something deeper than admiration. It was belonging. For years, she had measured men by their words. Eli taught her to measure by their silence. Her father saw it too. "He's a good man," Jedediah said that evening, his voice softer than usual. "Not one for fancy talk, but steady as the earth." Clara smiled. "I know, Pa. I reckon I've known since that day at the trough." Jedediah leaned back, eyes heavy with years of wisdom. "You don't need my blessing, Clara. But if you did, you'd have it. That boy's got the kind of honor you can't buy." Eli tried to leave the next morning. He saddled his old mare before sunrise, hoping to slip away quiet. But Clara was waiting by the gate. "You're runnin'," she said, folding her arms. He looked away. "Ain't runnin', just movin' on. Done what needed doin'." She stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "You saved my father's life, Eli. You could have stayed to see him heal. Eli hesitated, his hands tightening on the reins. Didn't figure I belonged here, Miss Hensley. Folks like you got roots. Folks like me, just dust on the wind. Her eyes softened. Then maybe it's time the wind stopped somewhere. He looked at her long and quiet, as if trying to memorize her face against the sunrise. You don't know what you're sayin'. I ain't got a name worth speakin' or land worth claimin'. My past ain't clean. She smiled faintly. Neither's this town, but it's home to both now. For the first time, Eli had no words. That night, Clara set an extra plate at the dinner table, and when he sat down, even the old ranch hands nodded approval. He wasn't a stranger anymore. Days turned into weeks, and Eli became part of the ranch, teaching the younger boys how to rope, fixing windmills, riding fence lines with Clara until the sun dipped low. They talked little, but every word counted. Sometimes, silence said more than 1,000 promises. One evening, Clara found him sitting by the creek, whittling wood. You ever think about leaving again? She asked. He shook his head slowly. Not since I found something worth staying for. Her chest warmed, but before she could speak, thunder rolled in the distance, not from the sky, but from hooves. Trouble was riding back into Redstone. Boone Keller had escaped custody. The town marshal brought word that Keller and 2 men were headed toward the ranch, seeking revenge for the brother Eli had killed. The air turned sharp with tension. Jedediah gathered the ranch hands, loaded rifles, and prepared for a siege. But Eli stood apart, quiet as ever, checking his revolver and saddling his mare. Clara grabbed his arm. Don't you dare go out there alone. He met her eyes calmly. Ain't about being alone, Clara. It's about finishing what's following me. If I don't ride out, they'll come for your family. She shook her head fiercely. Then I'm ridden with you. He almost smiled, but there was sorrow in it. You're the bravest woman I ever met, but this fight's mine. Before she could argue, he leaned forward and kissed her forehead, the gentlest touch she'd ever known, and rode off into the dark. The night swallowed him whole. Hours passed before gunfire echoed through the valley, sharp and distant. Clara's heart pounded with every shot until silence fell. Then came the longest hour of her life. When Eli finally rode back, dawn bleeding pink across the horizon, his shirt was torn and bloodied, but his eyes were alive. It's done, he said simply. Keller was gone, and peace rode with the sunrise. Clara ran to him, tears breaking free. You fool of a man, she whispered, holding him tight. Could have died. He smiled faintly. Would have been worth it. From that day forward, Eli Carter never left the Hensley ranch. He worked it as if it were his own, side by side with Clara. The folks in town said it was only a matter of time before a wedding bell rang, but no one ever saw him propose. There was no grand speech, no diamond ring, no audience to witness the moment. One afternoon, after fixing a fence together, Clara simply said, "You fixin' to stay forever, cowboy?" And Eli, wiping sweat from his brow, said, "Reckon I already am." That was their vow. Plain, simple, true. Years later, the ranch thrived under both the names, Carter and Hensley. They built an orphan house by the creek, where children learned to ride and live honest. Travelers passing through Redstone spoke of the couple who ruled their land not with gold or pride but with kindness and grit. When folks asked Clara why she chose him after turning away 13 suitors, she'd smile and say, because he never asked. He just stayed. When Jedediah passed, the whole town gathered for his burial, and Eli stood beside Clara, his hand wrapped in hers. He whispered softly, "You think your pa's proud?" She looked up at him, tears shining like the sunset. "He would have been proud the day I found you." Years rolled on, their hair silvered, their steps slowed, but their love never did. In the evenings, they'd sit on that same porch where it all began, watching the wind ripple through the wheat fields. Sometimes, Clara would tease him. 13 suitors, Eli, you weren't even number 14. You were the man who didn't try. He'd chuckle, eyes warm. Guess that's why you noticed me. And when the final chapter of the days came, Redstone remembered them not as the rancher's daughter and the drifter, but as proof that love doesn't always roar, it sometimes whispers and waits for the right soul to hear it. So, if you ever ride through the valley where the prairie meets the sky, you might see two shadows sitting by a wooden porch, hand in hand, watching the sun fall. They say it's just light and dust, but old-timers swear, it's Clara and Eli, together still. If you believe in love that's earned, not asked for, hit that subscribe button and ride with us again for more Wild West tales of heart, honor, and forever. Cowboy hat face red heart.